So thank you so much, and I'm very happy to all those who preceded me because they've dealt with all the thorny and difficult political issues, which allows me to go straight into the machine room, which is probably a bit less exciting, but maybe also to some extent less controversial, even if you see that some of the issues that have been raised in the previous presentation keep coming up. So I have to talk about NATO's role in counterterrorism. Tommy stole my first slide. That's not fair, which was all about 9/11, but it is important. Symbolically, it's very important. Until 9/11, I actually joined NATO in 1998. I'm a bit part of the furniture. Now that we moved to the new headquarters, no, the furniture is younger than me, but I used to be in the old building. There was no thought that terrorism could be a NATO task. Terrorism was the remit of national law enforcement and domestic security services. That was it. This really changed with 9/11, and it changed in multiple ways, but one way that is very important is that for those who are familiar with NATO, the cornerstone of NATO is the so-called Article 5 of the Washington Treaty, the idea that an attack against a member is considered as an attack against all members. Article 5 was invoked only once in NATO history, and it was after the 9/11 attacks. So it is quite interesting because, again, Article 5 was not conceived with that in mind, was a Cold War creation, was considered against a Soviet invasion. But the only time when it really became operational was after 9/11. Some people say, yeah, symbolically is important, practically did not mean much at the time. I think it also meant much practically subsequently. I would not imagine all the allies stay committed to a mission such as ISAF for such a lengthy duration of time without the declaration of Article 5 in 2001. So just to give you a timeline of NATO's work on counterterrorism, we start with 2001. In 2002, the military committee develops a military concept for defense against terrorism. It is quite interesting that it is the only ever NATO document that tries an effort at defining terrorism. You will find no political document of the alliance that tries to define terrorism. The only definition is the military concept. In 2004, we have the establishment of a terrorist threat intelligence unit, because at the beginning, a lot of the work focused on increasing the exchange of information. Could we exchange intelligence? In hindsight, probably it turned into a false start. You don't exchange real intelligence between 19, 26, or 29 nations. You do it bilaterally. But that was the initial, the early efforts to try to find a role for NATO in counterterrorism. I think that what NATO very early defined is, we are not the primary organization. We can play a role in certain areas, and we have to identify the specific niche areas where NATO has the expertise to contribute something. So we don't see ourselves as the frontline international organization against terrorism. It would not even be serious. We see ourselves as the organization that can provide some specific capabilities in areas where NATO has an expertise. And I think the key date for that was when in 2014 we developed the first action plan. And then after the Warsaw Summit, where we decided to do more to counter terrorism, and we moved on an action plan to enhance NATO's role in the international community's fight against terrorism. You know that international organizations like short titles for what they are doing. The action plan has been revised the first time in 2018, and we are revising it again now in time for the leaders meeting in December 2019. So we're in the process of reviewing it once more. So what do we have in the action plan? You can see here the 5 main areas into which we have divided NATO work in counterterrorism. The first is awareness of an analysis, with the creation of a new terrorism intelligence cell, with the creation of an exciting forum in the regional hub for the South, and with the biometric data policy, which I think is a very important effort from NATO to make sense of the extensive information which is collected of individuals in the context of NATO operations, especially after Afghanistan. Preparedness and responsiveness. This is mostly on the resilience and consequence management procedures. So how can we support the resilience of governments, country states in the wake of a terrorist attack? The development of capabilities, which is mostly ensured through the program of work, is not prisoner of war, is program of work on defense against terrorism, the DAT POW, which focus on very technical but crucial areas such as counter-ID, CBRN defense, explosive ordnance disposal. These may sound very specific and technical areas, but these are those where we have a real contribution to make based on the expertise that is available within the alliance. Capacity building and partnerships, which remains there. Tommy, do not smile at the end of the table. It is, to some extent, old wine in new barrels. It is also a reflection of the way the approach to partnership has changed within the alliance. The alliance, sorry, I said I would not go into very strategic thing, but I find important to make this remark. In 2010, when we developed the strategic concept, which is still the strategic concept of NATO, we identified 3 core tasks, which were collective defense, crisis management, and collective security. And yes, cooperative security, which is another word for partnerships. And since 2010, but even before, NATO has been in a constant dialogue between these 3 core tasks, which can become more predominant at different times. Collective defense is something that until 2014 was very much in the background. It has now become much more prominent. Partnerships were all the big story of the 90s. Crisis management with the operations in the Western Balkans and Afghanistan, but now the level of operational commitment is reduced, but it can grow again in the future. So capacity building is a reflection of how we look at partnerships now, also with the focus on the idea that helping certain partners develop their capacities is also to some extent a first line of defense for the alliance against the instability that originates from certain regions. So it is not just partnership under a new name, but it has a different angle. And then the 5th thing is, of course, operations. There are operations like ISAF was, where the counter-terrorism role is an important practical role. Yes, we participated in the global coalition in a non-combat role. That's what was mostly training, AWACS, this kind of commitment. So this is what we've done with the action plan. Now, as I said, we came out last year with an updated action plan, and we will have a further one again coming now, which however will be evolutionary and not revolutionary. So it will largely follow the lines of what was already done last year. And here, even more than on the first effort, we focused really on what can we do in technological and practical projects to help the allies and the partners develop capabilities that can counter some of the terrorist threats. We have now 3 of the flagship projects. They are mentioned here. Let me try to use this thing. We try to do something smart. When you click on it, should open a specific slide, but I'm not sure it's going to work. So one is countering terrorist misuse of technology in the form of drones. Yeah, actually it works. So we focus on low, slow, and small drones. I think that the expert's name is Class 1 UAS. The idea is what can we bring together to counter the threat, to jam them, to divert them, to help them not to be a threat. And we are talking about drones that can be used in an operational context, but we're also talking about research that can help counter the use of drones by terrorists, even in a city or in a domestic context. So we are at the crossroads where the technological research conducted through the alliance can also then help domestic reactions to terrorism. Now, let me see if I'm able to go back. Then we have technical exploitation. Technical exploitation, this is also to some extent old wine in a new format. You're on a battlefield, you collect a letter written by a terrorist, you collect his smartphone. What can you do with the data which is there? You can use it for force protection purposes to know what are, maybe there are messages about upcoming attacks. You can help better understand the network of this individual. You can maybe see some technological tools that are used, maybe to use the smartphone as a remote for the detonation of improvised explosive devices. There is a whole set of ways in which you can use the information that you find on the battlefield. So the idea is, how can we structure this work? How can we make it helpful? First and foremost, for the force protection of NATO-led troops in an operation, but then again, for research purposes that can have broader implication also in support of the work of domestic agencies. And a very specific subset of technological exploitation is what we call battlefield evidence collection. One of the things that you can do with the information that you find on a battlefield is you can use it for domestic prosecution. You can use it to identify a returning foreign terrorist fighters and identify what the guy did while he was deployed in a certain area. It's a vast issue because it has to do with legal implications, with different legal system, with the sharing of information, with the admissibility of evidence. So it is a huge task, but this is again an area where we see that the information that NATO troops gather, NATO-led troops, gather in the course of an operation can be of relevance for law enforcement purposes in allied or partner countries. So these are the main areas where we are trying to focus with the new action plan. Sorry, it should have come back. Yep, my fault. So, yeah, I should go to the one with the full page. Wow, I'm still not bad with PowerPoint. So, one next, to support a broader counterterrorism approach, to keep pace with emerging trends, I think that we will try more and more, especially as NATO focuses, and Benedetta said it, on the technological aspects and keep it the technological edge. One clear point of contact with CT is how to focus on countering technologically the technological threats that can emanate from terrorist actors, and maintaining high standards in the delivery of training, education, exercises, and all that can make us sharper, better, leaner at working on counterterrorism. This is again a kind of summary, and this concludes my presentation. Thank you very much.